So hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of CFO 4.0. And with me, if you do not know this name by now, I will be incredibly surprised. Not just because he's been on the podcast a couple of times, but obviously he's a big name in the world of finance and particularly the future finance. So I want to welcome Chris Argent from GenCFO back on the show. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me. It's a lovely intro. I am probably doing a little bit too much on LinkedIn, so apologies for that.
Well, it's useful content, right? We were talking about this before, but you've somehow turned it into a real LinkedIn influencer, particularly in the space of finance. And what I love about what you talk about is it's all about the future and where finance needs to get to and where it's going, which is incredibly exciting, which is one of the reasons I wanted you back on the podcast. So you've recently completed the GenCFO Academy. And for those of you that are regular listeners, you will have heard our session debriefing on day one, which we actually did live at the Academy itself. And today was very much a follow-up. So, for those that didn't get the chance to jump onto the Academy and actually listen to some of the sessions on day two, let's just talk about the themes. So what was day two all about?
So, the Academy, if people haven't seen it, it's a 2-day sort of summit where people come together to sort of listen and learn. It's virtual. But GenCFO is very much focused on, promoting new ways of working, new talent, new tech, new capability. We've always got our eye on the future. And obviously that aligns quite heavily to technology as well as new talent. And the Academy is the sister to our main summit, our Thought Leadership Summit, which is the Academy's, if you like, for people who are actually doing the change. So we try to operationalize a lot of the thought leadership that comes from the summit, which is in May. And then in November, we actually talk about how we're going to do it. And day two was focused on sort of talent and new talent that we had identified through our Digital Finance Function Awards, and an eye on the future as well. So being sort of tech enabled and maybe having a slightly more open mind to what this role is all about and, the way we go about it.
And that's an interesting comment you there about having an open mind and, and then being tech enabled. So tell our audience what you mean by that.
So, I talk to loads of different types of people from the accounting and finance industry, and we're focused on, business and industry, right? We're not focused on practice. And I think there's a real mix of people, as you'd expect, at all different levels. But I think what's different now is that, you can have a sort of transformational mindset at any level of your career, and you could come in, as a sort of accountant, but you've done computer science and you want, you're more Gen Z, so you want to get on with some projects rather than sitting in an admin role for 2 years. And these people are looking to make change. And I think that's what I mean about being sort of more transformational. Now, I don't think it is a generational thing. I think there are equally loads of, millennials and even, boomers not so long ago who were looking to change, right? And it is having this sort of openness to change and this openness to new capability, new ways of working, new technology. And let's face it, right? We are not trained to be that way. We are trained to be accurate and precise and controlled. So it is a new way of looking at our industry, and we're doing our best to kind of open up that conversation with people who are doing it.
And it's a really interesting comment you made in there about, generationally, there's a lot of people coming through. Do you think the lack of the transformation mindset in maybe the older generations, and I don't mean everyone's like that, because you can when I'm speaking to people, you can quite clearly see those that have it. But I think it's an interesting piece that we're saying that there's a lot of people in those younger generations that are coming through these mindsets. Do you think it's a generational piece, or do you think it's how finance has been historically that's built the lack of a transformational mindset?
Yeah, I don't think it's to do with the people, to be honest. I think it's to do with the profession. So, on day 2, we had, obviously we kicked off with yourself, but then we had, a young CFO who adding real value at a growth company, one of the fastest growing companies in the world at the moment, Waterdrop. She's taking a very different approach to say, my boss as a CFO would have taken, 20 years ago. She's a business partner. She is, actively investing in technology to make sure they're not just putting bums on seats, but they're creating this asset, this intangible asset in the back office. She's data savvy. Sylvia Ianita is her name. Talk about she. And Sylvia's, data savvy, and she's partnering with the CEO to grow the company. And, it's a real success story. So it's maybe more sort of throwing out that back office title or that support role title and saying, no, I'm a business leader, but there were 2 other sessions on that day too, which is probably more aligned to your question, which is it a generational thing? The first one was the F word, right? Which is, we need the chief future officer, which was a mixed panel. People who had been in their careers, let's say for sort of 20, 25 years, and some who had been in for 10. And then there was another panel that we had with rising stars who were all probably, the 10 and under. And I just think it depends on, who you find. And all of these people were transformation, and all of them had relevant stories about change and their approach to how they want to change their roles. One thing that they might all have in common, though, is that they're almost reluctant accountants. Right? They don't want to be, what the profession says in black and white we should be. They went in to be business people. They realized they had to do accounting to get the job. But now they're almost saying, look, I'm not even sure how relevant that is. Let's just go and be business people. Let's just go and transform. Let's go and support the business. So I don't think it is a generational thing. And I think the people are there. But I also think the profession itself is, very much locked in 200 years of history. And it's hard to turn that tanker, right? As we saw, when that tanker got stuck in the Suez Canal, it took a couple of weeks for it to, get straight again and move on. And the profession is a bit like that. It's complex. There are multiple areas of learning. You start throwing in, business acumen and business partnering and sort of technology and automation analytics. Like it doesn't start looking like the profession. So I think they're struggling with it as well.
That's really interesting. So what else came out of that session? So about the future officer, what did the panel see as that person, that profile that we need within the profession?
So I think they all acknowledged that you had to have a sort of transformational mindset. You had to have one eye on the future, otherwise you were potentially not offering value. So if you do what you've always done in accounting and finance, then you're going to lose your seat at the table. I think they were all kind of acutely aware of that, and they felt that they naturally had started to, respond to the business, respond to business demand. We had a transformational director from Air France. We had a CFO from Rebrank, which is a sort of new financial services company. We had a transformation director on there, who's I think also part of the ACCA council. But all these people had their own sort of take on what it meant to be this chief future officer. But they were definitely looking past what we currently do as a profession. They were looking at talent that was coming through as not necessarily all being accountant qualified. They knew that, they had to change the structure of their teams to address this business demand, and it wasn't just going to be a short-term thing. Whether it was new analytics or new automation, they knew that they had to respond to it because there's this pull from the business, but also there's this issue with recruitment at the moment where Gen Z don't necessarily want to do the jobs that these guys were doing 20 years ago. And if you expect people to sit in transactional processing jobs for 2-3 years before they get any promotion or any kind of, experience elsewhere in the business, they're just not going to stay. So I think there's this, that they know they have to change. And I think that's probably the common denominator there.
And how do you, in terms of, was there any consensus around what the entry level jobs for finance will look like in future? Because you're right, let's be honest, technology is taking away a lot more of that transactional entry capabilities, but it's also a great sort of stepping stone into the next level roles and understanding finance. So where do you think, or where did the panel think those entry level roles were actually going to be moving forwards?
It's a interesting one, and part of the debate was very much a conversation you would only have at this sort of panel discussion, because it was about whether we should be learning debits and credits and T accounts and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, God, you really wouldn't have this conversation anywhere else. But it just showed that we're having a bit of a possible identity crisis, or what is most important to learn nowadays isn't clear, and pathways for people aren't as clear as they used to be. I see these sort of career maps that come out from recruitment consultants, but I still feel that they're 10, 20 years old, maybe even longer. The route to CFO, and not everyone wants to be a CFO either nowadays. I think we touched on that before. So I think there's I've forgotten the question now, but I think there is there's a consensus that these entry level roles are going to be very different. And there was an acknowledgement that maybe automation has more a role to play in that than just forcing people to sort of do that learning and never use it. And it's not to say, it's a bit like, you learn algebra at school and never use it, in real life. It's not to say that we shouldn't be learning some of these concepts, but it's just in reality, how relevant are they? And are there more other relevant things that we could be learning?
Yeah, it's an interesting piece, isn't it? How do you build the fundamentals and understanding of finance without actually going through and doing the day-to-day piece? And I find it interesting as well, because within our organization, we actually put our guys through AAT. So obviously we're supporting accounting software, and you think that we need to know the tech, but actually fundamentally for me, it's the understanding and the principles that sit behind that tech that you need to know in order to then figure out, because it's not when things go right that the fundamentals are important, it's kind of when things go wrong. So there isn't, it's that you need to know it. But I completely agree with you, the entry level in, and it's really interesting, isn't it, to think about what those entry level roles can look like in, say, 5 or 10 years time, when there aren't invoices to enter or code, that there aren't necessarily emails being sent out and invoicing being done manually. It's how to, and also where's the next pool of talent going to come from if we don't have those entry level roles? Is it going to be, is reporting going to be an entry level role?
Yeah, I think there's a I don't believe that anything's going to be fully automated anytime soon, and so obviously each transaction's got its own quirks. I think, where that knowledge is needed is when things go wrong, as you say, but that's only going to be sort of 2-3% of the transactions. So whereas before we were kind of learning on the job, doing 100% of the transaction entry or reconciliation or reporting, whatever it was, now there's like a smaller window for people to learn from. So, let's say the AI is doing most of the work and it's spitting out all these exceptions, or you're finding errors. well, then this newbie, this new person has to sort of say, well, okay, I now have to learn from a much smaller opportunity than I did before. But, you might only need one or two of those people now, or it might be only an hour in your day rather than it being a full-time job. So I think there are other things they can be focusing on, and there are other things they should be working on as well. So I think there is a bit of an issue there, but actually it's still it's going to be a very small part of your job. You could probably Google how to enter double entry journals in the future to do that 1 hour job, right? It's not that this is the whole of your job anymore.
Yeah, and I guess it's making sure we still have roles that are entry level in finance, because otherwise, or are we actually, like you said, maybe looking at recruiting from other areas in order to bring people into finance, ops or sales, or
it's definitely happening already. Yeah, it's happening already where with mixed results, right? But in, say, FP&A teams or in reporting teams, you might just bring someone in who's very good with Excel or visualization or analytics, and they kind of, can you go and do that part for me, please? Because I need more data to be wrangled, more data to be managed. And, you could have mixed results from that. Some people will try and build you a database when it takes 2 seconds to do sort of like a lookup table or something like that, a pivot table, power pivot. But on the other side, you've got, people coming in who are business experts supporting our team. So I've heard recently of sort of internal audit recruiting from marketing and ops and sales so that they can apply their knowledge to the internal audit role. Or these which, because that team now has quite a lot of its work automated, it's the output that you need to understand, which is why they're leaning on business people. Go back 5-10 years, an audit team would be, sort of the big four, audit trained, probably gone into practice and then moved into an internal audit role like that. Yeah, it's totally different shape now. So yeah, it's definitely happening. And there's a skills gap with some of these roles. So we need to look elsewhere as well.
Yeah, and I think also there's a bit, isn't there, about how we train these people in a way that we don't lose the value of that accounting knowledge. Like, in your opinion, do you feel like the current training and development programs that are available in finance now support that transition from other departments into finance?
There's always been sort of finance for non-finance, courses out there. And I think, they do a good job. They cover the concepts of, accruals and, prepayments and, the statements that we need to produce. So I think bringing people into our teams is less of an issue if they have that entry level knowledge. But it's also based on their role. If they have to be partnering with the business, or if they have to understand that function, that domain area like marketing more than the average person in finance, then that's going to be what they lean on. It's going to be super helpful. In a way, that's why this finance business partnering trend is so big, because it's the flip side. It's us being told we need to go and learn more about marketing or sales or those functions out there in the business to support the business more. Some teams are just bringing these people in. The issue that you have, though, is there are very few business people who want to move into finance if it is seen as a back office accounting and finance role. If you create, an analytics team or a business insights team and you form people around that, that's a bit more interesting. If you have operational excellence automation team and you bring people in around that, that's a bit more interesting. But saying to people, we've got a load of traditional accountants sat in the back office, do you want to go and join them? It's never going to happen.
So is that a problem with the perception of finance within an organization, or is that a problem with people don't understand the role itself within finance?
No, I think they understand the role within finance. There's lots of research out there. If you ask the business what they want accounting and finance to be doing, they say, well, you're good at accounting and finance, do more accounting and finance, please. So they know what we need to be good at. It's just that we're changing. So we need to go on our own sort of PR mission, right? We need to be going out into the business and proving our value, probably internally first. So get our house in order, show the value of, automating your own finance processes, bringing better analytics and forecasting to, the work that you do, presenting that to the business, going out there and really trying to support the business in growth rather than just talking about a variance on your budget, So I think we need to go out there, and that's very much on the CFOs and the senior leadership's sort of head most of the time. But I actually think we can all be moving in that way. The CFOs had to step up massively over the pandemic. The whole team should be as well. And the CFO should be allowing that to happen, and the business should be allowing us to support. It's just that the business right now sees us as, the back office data reporting library, where, it's where it needs to change. It needs to be much more proactive. It needs to be much more kind of data led, looking at an entire industry rather than just, a couple of lines on a P&L, trying to support, the company-wide initiatives rather than just maybe your piece of the P&L. So, yeah, there's a lot that we can do to promote what we do.
Maybe we should add PR guru into the CFO's job description.
Yeah, marketing. What we do is
maybe we need marketers in finance for finance. So,
but jokes aside, right? That's you look on LinkedIn. That's why a lot of people are doing, this. We are, we're a community of people, and we get people coming to us for different reasons, and sometimes people come to us because they want to. They want a bit of brand exposure or PR exposure, or they want to do an interview with us or speak at an event and then show their business because they are on that journey. So it's happening, but I think we can do much more of it. And this isn't just for the senior leadership who's looking for promotion. I think this is for everybody, to show. And funnily enough, Gen Z and digital natives are happy to be seen out there. They're social media savvy and they post their pictures everywhere, just to sort of say, hey, look what I am. So I think it will happen naturally. I just think we can be doing it a lot faster.
I couldn't agree with you more. I find it really interesting. So obviously doing what I do, I love interviewing CFOs. I think there's nothing better than actually speaking to CFOs about the journey that they are on and giving that whole, I've been there, I've done that, and this is the challenges that I faced piece on the podcast. But what I find genuinely fascinating is that how many CFOs some are like really eager and on board, which is fabulous, those that get it. There's a lot of people that are quite reluctant to come on the podcast and be interviewed, that I don't know how much of that is they don't understand the value of it, and how much of it is just they haven't had that exposure to the type of brand building activities that we're talking about. So I do find it really interesting.
Yes, I think it's a fascinating debate. Like, we had our GenCFO South, our community meetup last week, and there was this big debate around, and that's more the sort of senior leadership in the room. And there was a debate about post-pandemic people problems and how the introverts have become more introverted, and actually, stereotypes aside, we are more analytical, and arguably there are a lot of introverts in this profession historically because that's, appealed to them. But there was this conversation saying, well, how do we get the introverts back into the office, and how do we get my team functioning if there's more introverts than extroverts, and do we need to employ more extroverts? And it was like, it's really, really difficult for people to sort of manage this equation that we found ourselves in. People being at home, happy at home, being encouraged to be at home, and then saying, right, I don't want to come back into the office. And I think it's the same with this, PR, profile building. We're probably less reluctant to do that. But everyone agreed, if you don't get back into the office and if you don't do this visible leadership, it's going to affect your promotion chances. So I think they know they need to do it, but maybe it's just in some people's characters. They need to find a good podcast host to talk to, right? So it feels more
absolutely
feels easier.
No, I think that there is something about baby steps, isn't there? Going straight in. But I think there's a value, like you say, there's a valuable piece about brand building both internally and externally, and how I know, and that's a key part of that CFO and that strategic leadership piece. So before we get too distracted with the need for people to come on podcasts, right? Because I'm pretty sure I could quite happily talk about that for another 25 minutes. Let's go back to the GenCFO Academy, because I noticed that you repeated a couple of phrases as we were going through this. And the one key one was transformational mindset. And I think it'd be really good for us to define what you see as a transformational mindset and some of the characteristics of that transformational mindset that came out in the academy sessions that you were doing.
Yeah. So transformational mindset, okay, in 30 seconds. So first of all, transformation is a one-way journey. Right? I think people sometimes mix this up, right? So when we talk about change, it can go one way and it can come back. It's a bit here and there. Transformation is a one-way journey. So we are going to cut that tie with the past when we move forward, when we make this change. So having a transformational mindset is about building new capability, bringing in new talent with the objective to stop what we're doing. And some people are very happy with how things are. They've worked, in this way for 10 years. They've worked with the same people, ways of working for 10 years. They've got the same system probably for 10 years, and they don't want to look outside that world. So having a transformational mindset is saying, look, I'm not happy with what we've got. I'm a reluctant accountant or whatever. I want to move the team forward. I want to move forward. I want to change our capability. And it's not about just being curious. You have to get involved. You have to sort of understand the scope. You have to understand the capabilities. You have to understand the change itself, right? Which is kind of where GenCFO comes in. You have to find peers to talk to as well. So we have this sort of online community where people can sort of ask questions, community of practice, what I call it. But then by understanding enough, you can make an informed decision whether you want to go one way or the other. And some people just say, okay, I want to do more finance business partnering, or some people say, look, this isn't for me. I'm just going to stick with what I'm doing. But at least you've sort of made that decision. So having a transformational mindset is really trying to make sort of permanent, long-lasting change. And the reason why we say this is important is because we feel, our reason for being is that CFOs, to remain high-performing in high-performing companies, need to transform. If they just continue doing what they're doing, they will potentially lose their seat at the table because other people will be able to provide insight. Other people will be able to, communicate with the business about that insight better than them. They won't be seen forever as this, right-hand man or woman of the CEO. So that's why transformational mindset and what we do at GenCFO is so important.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think there is a danger that if finance doesn't shift, like you say, that it will be, I don't think the finance operations will never be obsolete, but other people take responsibility for finance if finance doesn't step up to the plate and become that strategic finance vision, that insight leader that businesses need. And what was also, I noticed as well on your, in terms of the agenda, you had an entire panel on the shift. I think it's called the shift panel, talking about identifying and overcoming blockers to this transformation, to this driving of change across the organization. And were there any interesting sort of, or any unexpected insights as part of that session? Or was it the typical people, process, technology conversations?
So I think the great one about the shift panel, which, as you say, was about identifying and overcoming blockers to transformation. The great thing about it is sometimes, I live in a little bubble, and I'm sure you do with your, world of transformation and consulting. But actually, what was so refreshing about that one is that these were, big companies. Every that used to be Hermes, big gambling company, Honda Motor, big companies who are saying exactly what I'm saying. So this isn't Chris's opinion and he's pushing an agenda. He's talking about 5-10 years time. It doesn't matter to me. These were CFOs, finance transformation people who were sat in these organizations saying, Mark, I could almost quote him, said, absolutely, we will lose our seat at the table if we don't transform, if we don't take on data, if we don't manage the data, because someone has to be responsible for one version of the truth. I'm working in a very data heavy organization, and it is his goal as a, FD to get that data and analytics right for finance. Now, nothing about tax, nothing about, the board papers or where we're, going to be overnight for the board meeting. It was at that level. And it was great to hear, because I think a lot of people talk a good game when it comes to this. I think they want to be seen as kind of doing edge things, and technology is one of those areas that I think they're happy to go so far because we're not traditionally trained in it. It's no criticism of them, but a lot of people just stop too early. They say, well, let's have a look at it. They look at it, they talk about it. It's possibly, on the list of achievements for the year, but nothing really comes from it. So people who are actually taking it on, learning, adding it to the finance agenda, the CFO organization agenda, I think it's brilliant to see.
It's nice to hear from people, and big companies as well that are also going through that journey. I think there is an assumption that sometimes that, people that are in a CFO role and that are doing that, that everything's perfect. And it's great that you're bringing those conversations. And like you say, I do live in a bubble. I'm really lucky in that the people that choose to work with us know that they need to change and they want to change and they're willing to invest in change. So yeah. I am in a very lucky position in that I'm speaking with people that have a motivator, that have a drive and are wanting to make that shift. But like you say, there's a lot of people in across all organizations that are quite happy with the status quo, that are willing to stay within their bubble and within their current role and within their current function. There's a real risk that finance will lose their seat at the table or become less prominent, I think is perhaps the way to phrase it.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's going to be losing their job anytime soon. I don't think it's about redundancy or automation, taking people's jobs. I just think it's the type of job that we'll be doing won't be as good as we could if we take this on. The value that we bring to the business won't be as much if we don't do this. So, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that anyone's losing their job and we don't have a great career in finance, but we just have so much more that we could be doing. And it's what people want. If you talk to sort of people entering into their careers, they don't necessarily want to be CFO. They want to be their own boss. They want a dynamic working environment. So give them projects, give them interesting things to work on, give them a business partnering role. Now that brings its own challenges because they're inexperienced, but there's an opportunity there to sort of do a very different job. And I just think it's, having worked in analytics and BI in some big companies for a while, it's the most creative thing you can do in finance, accounting and finance, I think, from visualization all the way through to, sort of the data management, the data wrangling, and then going talking to the business about the outcomes. It's incredible. So there's so much that we should be doing. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch, right, to say, that marketing was in this position, 15, 20 years ago when they had a paper-based, approach to their business. And then the internet came along. And then all of a sudden there were a group of people saying, hey, what's this digital marketing all about? And there were a lot of people saying, well, yeah, it's not for me. And we know that paper-based, marketing works, right? We still push letter today, actually. So, we'll still continue doing that. But look what's happened. The digital marketing career now arguably is marketing. The paper-based environment still works. People still push paper through doors to try and get leads. But, it's not seen as cutting edge or interesting. So I think it's not a stretch to say we're in exactly the same boat. We can stick with what we have, maybe reduce what we're doing over time. But we could be doing so much more and so much fun. And the digital finance function, which is what I call it is the digital marketing for the CFO. So go and learn that, go and do that, because that's going to be really fun.
Absolutely. And I think also marketing's a brilliant example of how tying together creativity and analytics can drive a real business results. I think, especially when you speak to good marketers, the way that they understand numbers is incredible. And the way that they use that insight to drive it. And I think, again, if we think about who, the change that marketers have gone through over the last 10 years, that they've reinvented their function. And realigned their function with what the business needs. And I think it's finance turn, isn't it, next? So
it is. And, working with people like that it will be a learning curve for us as well. Because let's say your marketing team is investing in a campaign that works really well, but they just hit a budget. Well, our traditional role would be, sorry, you've hit budget, there's no more money. But actually our new role should be, here's money to add more value, to get more business. And actually the future role that I'm talking about is knowing enough about the business to actually take that money to them as an opportunity and say, I don't know whether you've realized, but this campaign's working really well. I'm going to give you double the budget to go and give this a boost. So I think that's how far we can go with this if we move away from the traditional ways of working. Absolutely.
Cost controllers to resource visionaries is definitely the direction of travel. So Chris, for those that are listening, they're going, this sounds like a really interesting conversation. And whilst your summary has been fabulous, Chris, if they want to hear more from the actual speakers and hear the sessions live, how can they do that?
Yeah, I'm scratching the surface and I'm all over the place because there were like 30 sessions over 2 days, if I'm being really honest. And it's all a blur. So yeah, the best place to find it is if you go to academy.generationscfo.com, or if you put in GenCFO Academy to Google, I'm sure you'll find it. And there's a whole replays section on there. And if you do sign up to the GenCFO community platform, pro members have all of the replays available to them there as well, from this one and all the past summits as well.
Brilliant. So for those of you interested, I will, of course, pop the link into the show notes as usual, so you've got nice, easy access. But I want to say a massive thank you, Chris. I always love our conversations because you have an amazing ability to summarize the direction of travel and give us all food for thought and things to consider and ponder on. So I really appreciate your time today, Chris. And thank you so much for joining me again on the podcast.
Thank you, Hannah.
Brilliant. So thank you guys for joining today's session. If you have enjoyed today's session, then please do not forget to leave us a review, to tell somebody about the podcast, because that's how we grow and how we add value to this wider community. If you have topics, ideas, or things you'd like us to cover, then please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, or the podcast email is in the show notes as well. Take care of yourselves, guys, and we'll see you soon next time on the podcast.